Hello students, I will be continuing with the same concept, classification and the tabulation. In the last class, we have discussed about the meaning, definition and the objectives of a classification. Okay. The purpose of the survey may be anything. Sometimes the population of the country may be studied year-wise, or sometimes the population of a country may be studied locality-wise, or sometimes some other institution or organization wanted to know their characteristics such as their habits, or else their income, or else their about literacy, education, all these things, or sometimes they will wanted to know about their features like quantitative characteristics they may wanted to study. All these things depending upon the different situation they wanted to know. So depending upon different situation, that means the population may be sometimes year-wise or else the population may be locality-wise or area-wise, like that, or city-wise, or population, their quality characteristics such as their sex, like literacy or marital status, or sometimes the organization wanted to know about their height, weight and age, like that. The purpose of the survey may be anything. So here I have mentioned not only population, sometimes we collect the rainfall data weekly wise, or doctor may wanted to know the body temperature hourly basis, like that. All these are related to time period. And second thing is about the locality or geographical location wise they may wanted to know. Sometimes they, depending upon their quality, these are all what? Quality. That means quality is nothing but here one cannot numerically express. That means next thing is about their quantitative characteristics they may wanted to know. So depending upon the situation, we can make the different types of classification. The 4 different types of classifications are: one is depending upon their time, and second one is depending upon the location, and depending upon the qualitative data and quantitative data. Now, types of classification. We have 4 main different types we can mention here. One is a chronological, or another name for this classification is temporal classification, and second one is geographical, or another name is spatial classification, and third one is a qualitative classification, and fourth one is a quantitative. Classification. Now, as I told, depending upon the situation or depending upon the different characteristics, we can make the classification This is what chronological or temporal classification. First, before explaining, first note down, then I will explain one by one. First is chronological or temporal classification, geographical classification or spatial classification. Third one is qualitative classification and quantitative classification. So before going to the first one, you should know the meaning of temporal or chronological. So here chronological or temporal is nothing but related to time period. Time period ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿರೋದು year wise ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು or else time wise ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ hourly basis ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, whatever it may be related to time itself. Such kind of classification, such kind of divisions are known as a temporal or chronological classification. ಈಗ ಇಯರ್ ವೈಸ್ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಅನ್ನು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಥವಾ ಇಯರ್ ವೈಸ್ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಎಷ್ಟಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಇಯರ್ ವೈಸ್ ಸೇಲ್ಸ್ ಎಷ್ಟಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಥವಾ ರೈನ್ಫಾಲ್ ಡೇಟಾ ಇಯರ್ಲಿ ವೈಸ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಆಲ್ ದೀಸ್ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಶನ್ ಆರ್ ರಿಲೇಟೆಡ್ ಟು ವಾಟ್? ರಿಲೇಟೆಡ್ ಟು ಟೈಮ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್. Such kind of classification is known as a temporal classification. So here classification, temporal classification is a classification is made according to time period. Such kind of classification is known as a temporal or chronological classification. So example that I can give is, here the population may be considered year wise. Population of India year wise, that is year and population. So here I can make the classification year wise on the basis of year. So that is yearly, that is maybe 1981, 1991, 2001, 2011, like this. So there may be in millions. Then here 281, 631, then 991, then maybe 1021. For example, this is what the population of India according to what here I have mentioned year wise. So this is what according to time period. So not only this, I can take a body temperature or else what another ಇನ್ಯಾವುದು ಬೇರೆ ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ತಗೊಂಡು ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಕೂಡ ಇಯರ್ ವೈಸ್ ತಗೊಂಡು ಕೂಡ ಸೇಮ್. That is nothing but temporal or chronological classification. Now the second thing is about what? Spatial classification, spatial or geographical location. Sometimes ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ, ಈಗ ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಿದ್ರೆ ಅಥವಾ ಲಿಟ್ರಸಿಯನ್ನ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಿದ್ರೆ ಲೊಕ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿ ವೈಸ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಅಥವಾ ಯಾವ ಸಿಟಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆನ್ಸಿವ್ ಅಂತ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಿದ್ರೆ ಆ ರೀಜನಿನ ಏನು ಜನರ ಹ್ಯಾಬಿಟ್ ಹೇಗಿದೆ ಅಥವಾ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಎಷ್ಟಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ we have to go for location wise or city wise or area wise. So all these are related to what? Area. So such kind of classification based on area wise classification is known as a geographical classification or as a spatial classification. So now now chronological, after the chronological classification, next second classification, second type of classification is spatial or geographical classification. Second thing, geographical or spatial classification. Classification. Answer. Classification is based on geographical location or area wise, such as cities, then locality wise, etc. So all these are based on what? Based on a geographical location. Such kind of classification is known as a spatial classification. So what are the examples that I can give? Yavalla examples ಕೊಡಬಹುದು ಹಾಗಾದ್ರೆ? It should be city wise ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ locality wise ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ area wise ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು. So ಈಗ ನಾವು ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಯಾವ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್, ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಶುಗರ್ ಯಾವ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೈಯೆಸ್ಟ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಿದ್ರೆ ಏನಾಗಬೇಕು? ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ವೈಸ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು ಅಲ್ವಾ? ಅಥವಾ ಇನ್ನು ಪ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಯಾವ ಸಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದೆ, ವಿಚ್ ಇಸ್ ದ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಸಿಟಿ ಅಂತ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಿದ್ರೆ ಸಿಟಿ ವೈಸ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅಥವಾ ಯಾವ ಲೊಕ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಇಸ್ ಮೋರ್ ಹೆಲ್ದಿಯರ್ ಅಂತ ನೋಡ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಲೊಕ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿ ವೈಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ವಿಲೇಜ್ ವೈಸ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಆಲ್ ದೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ವಾಟ್ ರಿಲೇಟೆಡ್ ಟು geographical location. Such kind of classification is known as a spatial classification. Example: production of sugar in different state and production. You can take here population, state-wise population also you can take any other example which is related to area-wise, that is an example for a spatial classification. State UP, then Tamil Nadu, then Punjab, then Karnataka. So all these are different states I have considered, and the productions in million tons, then it may be 6.2, then 6.4, then here 9, maybe 2, then Karnataka maybe 5.6, like this. So this is what state-wise productions here mentioning here. So this is what example for geographical or spatial classification. Now, third type of classification is a qualitative classification. Before that, try to recall students what is meant by qualitative. So qualitative anta ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೇನು? ಇದು ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ನಾನು ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ what is meant by qualitative and quantitative variables attributes. ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ನೆನಪಿಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ, ರಿಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಯಾಕಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಮುಂದೆ ಬರೋ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ವೇರಿಯೇಬಲ್ಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಅಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ ಕೂಡ ನಿಮಗೆ ತಲೆಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕು. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಮೆಷರೇಬಲ್ and not measurable things. Okay, now here qualitative is nothing but the characteristics which are not or which are cannot be expressed in terms of numbers, or numerically it is not possible us to measure. Such kind of characteristics are known as qualitative or attributes. Attributes ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ one person ಇಂದ one characteristic ಇಂದ one unit ಇಂದ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು unit ಗೆ change ಆಗ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. So such kind of characteristics are called attributes. Attributes ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ನಿಮಗೆ numerically express ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗದೇ ಇರುವಂತಹ things ತಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬರಬೇಕು. ಯಾವುದಲ್ಲ ಅದು ಲಿಟ್ರಸಿ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, ಮೆರಿಟಲ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, or else habits ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, ಕಲರ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿರಬಹುದು, all these are what? Qualitative characteristics. So classification based on what? Qualitative characteristics are called qualitative classification. I think it barcode agide ankoltane. Next, third one is a qualitative classification. Third one is qualitative classification. First of all, you should know what is meant by qualitative or else attributes. Qualitative or attributes are not measurable things or not measurable things. So here, classification based on what are the attributes here? It may be such as sex, it may be literacy, then marital status, education or employment, etc. All these are what? It is related to quality or attribute it is. So, classification based on all these things are called qualitative classification. So, classification based on attributes are known as qualitative classification. So, under qualitative classification, again there are three types. One is a one-way or simple classification. One-way or simple classification. One-way or simple classification. Second one is dichotomous or two-way classification, and third one is manifold classification. Another name for manifold classification is contingency table. So here there are three types under qualitative classification itself. One is one-way or simple classification. Second one is we call it as dichotomous, and third one is manifold classification or else contingency table. Let us see one by one what is meant by one-way or simple, and next one is dichotomous and manifold classification. So here the name itself indicates these all three are related to what? Related to attributes itself. Idu ella yavudku related agide? Attributes ge related agide. Yakke idu qualitative characteristic ಅಥವಾ qualitative classification alle barodrinda all these are related to qualitative, that means attributes. All these related to these things. Now, here the one-way or simple classification, name itself indicates that based on one characteristic. So here what we do is we categorize based on a single characteristic, or we divide the characteristics based on a single characteristic. That means here simple or one-way classification. Here first one is one-way one-way classification. Here, classification based on a single characteristic. Classification of the attributes here based on a single characteristic is known as a one-way or simple classification. Based on a single characteristic. So this is what one-way or simple classification. So here you can take any one characteristics, depending upon that you have to make the classification. So for example, I give in a particular locality, we wanted to know how many residents are there depending upon their occupation. ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಲೊಕ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಿದ್ರೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಫರೆಂಟ್ ಆಕ್ಯುಪೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಇರುವವರು ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಟೀಚರ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಆ ಲೊಕ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ಆಲ್ ದೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ಡಿಫರೆಂಟ್ occupations. Occupation is what? One particular characteristic. One particular what kind of characteristic it is? It is a qualitative. Because ನಮಗೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಮೆಷರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ವಾ? We can only give information. That's it. So this is what one example that I can give. Number of residents in a locality. So here occupation and number of residents. So this is one example. So you can mention any other occupation bank accountant or doctor, lawyer, etc. You can mention any other occupation. This is what one-way or simple classification. I have taken one characteristic and depending upon their number of residents. This is what simple or one-way classification. And next one is dichotomous and contingency table. And dichotomous is nothing but here two ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಎರಡು characteristic, depending upon their one characteristic we are dividing into two. Such kind of characteristics or such kind of classification is known as a dichotomous. So in the today's class we have discussed different types of characteristics. Under that we have discussed one-way chronological classification, spatial classification, and in qualitative classification we have seen one-way or simple classification, and next two classification and quantitative classification I will be discussed in the next class. I hope you guys have understand about today's session.